Good afternoon, everybody. It is 12:30 on Friday, the 27th of November, and I'm Michelle Beckett, and I'm joined as ever by Steph Camilleri, and we are both ADHD Unlocked. And this week in the ADHD Unlocked community, we
Good
have been looking
afternoon,
at the
everybody.
topic
It is 12:30.
of ADHD and sensory challenges that are related to our ADHD. Now, I was really surprised as to some of my ADHD traits, like clumsiness, are actually related to sensory issues. And I was also really surprised to learn that these sensory challenges aren't just getting overwhelmed by sensory stimuli, but being undersensitive or oversensitive, or maybe seeking sensory stimuli to do with my ADHD. So that's been a revelation for me, Steph, this week, learning about my ADHD, but it's not just confined to autism spectrum conditions or specific sensory processing disorder. I think it's almost universal, isn't it, with ADHD?
Yeah, it seems so. A lot of members were saying how surprised they were. They hadn't made the link. Not many ADHDers do, because as you said, it usually does fall under the kind of autism spectrum. But yeah, there's at least I'd say like one or two kind of sensory issues that us ADHDers tend to have. And yeah, so it's very interesting. Once it kind of goes on your radar, you can then really identify with the particular sensitivities that you might have.
Yeah, and what I also found was actually having a look at all of the senses and thinking about when this impacts me and my ADHD, I think will be really instrumental in kind of mitigating how I can manage it. And I do know that if I'm tired, or if I haven't eaten properly, or if I'm really overwhelmed or stressed, got a lot on my plate, or if, I'm premenstrual, that my sensory challenges get a lot worse. So I'm more sensitive to sound, or I can't hear people, so either over or under, or I can't tolerate certain scents or smells. So I think keeping your tank topped up, which is the key to, as we say nearly every week, key to managing our symptoms, I think is really, really key here. And I don't know if other ADHDers find that, Steph.
Yeah, no, it is kind of across the board because it takes a lot of energy to manage these kind of triggers that these sensory sensitivities have. So it could be, for instance, one example I gave was like roll neck. So some ADHDs have sensitivity to touch. So the way their clothes feel. I know as a kid, I would refuse to wear jeans. I would cry because I just hated the stiffness, the feel of around my legs. And sometimes, with roll necks as well, like if you're having, maybe in the morning you're okay, you can tolerate it, but then as the day goes on, it feels like it's choking you. So there definitely is that link between the tank and how full it is in terms of how you can manage these sensory sensitivities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does get worse throughout the day when you're tired. I think tiredness is one of the main factors. I can't stand having jewelry on later in the day sometimes if I get really tired, or even makeup, I have to take it all off because it feels like it's just, I've got mud on my face or something like that. Whereas early in the day, it doesn't feel like that at all. It's really, really strange. But there's other stuff that's related to sensory as well. And so dropping things. So there was that. I learned a new word this week, Steph, thanks to you and your presentation, which is proprioception, which is that sense of knowing where your body is in space, and knowing where, if you're holding a cup, how much of a grip have you got on it, and not bumping into the corner of your bed so that your shins are covered in bruises like mine are all of the time. So knowing where your body is in space. And I think because of our ADHD, our brains are on so many different things. Our operating system doesn't have enough bandwidth sometimes to know, about not to drop things. We can't carry this, or we're about to bump into the corner of the bed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we were talking, remember as well, how the link, or how sensory processing disorder, which is not identified, it's not recognized in the DSM-5 as an actual disorder. Elements of it, I think, obviously you see under the ASD diagnosis criteria, but of itself, it's not an independent diagnosis, but very much it's hard to know where the ADHD kind of begins and something like the sensory processing disorder picks up, because they definitely exacerbate each other, right? Because dyspraxia being kind of one of those that falls under the kind of sensory challenges as well. And yeah, but you add to that our ADHD inattention, hyperactivity, yeah, and it just exacerbates. It's on another level.
This whole issue of what is ADHD and what's a separate comorbid condition, and what is it helpful sometimes to silo out some of our traits that are directly related to our ADHD, that say, oh well, you've got this as well, or is it just all part of the one condition, which we're going to be discussing next week when we cover what is ADHD, what is responsible in terms of our traits and challenges for our ADHD condition. We thought we'd cover that next week, because this whole let's pick it apart. Do I have a bit of dyspraxia? Do I have a bit of sensory processing disorder? Do I have a bit of autism spectrum conditions? Or is it just one condition that's got traits which are shared by many of these challenges, which I find absolutely fascinating? For example, handwriting. My handwriting is awful. I can barely read my own.
Look at us.
Like, what on earth? Yeah, what on earth have I written down there? So I look back over my notes. What does that word even say? That's actually a sensory challenge, and that was on one of the quizzes that you posted this week, Steph. Was how bad is your handwriting? But that has its own term called dysgraphia or dysgraphia. So it's like, well, we could separate out every single ADHD trait here and have 10,000, or kind of just look at it holistically and go, okay, what challenges do I have and how can I, help mitigate for them and explain to the rest of my community that these are common with ADHD and it's because of my ADHD that I have these challenges, rather than going, oh, I've got this, this, and this. I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, well, with the kids, with the education, health, and care plans, in those plans, it's all about the broad areas of need. They very much take that holistic approach. It's not about what the kids have been diagnosed with, it's about their needs, first and foremost. And so, because obviously a need will kind of, there'll be maybe a similar need as a result of, say, the ADHD, dyslexia, something else, maybe autism, but it's that need. And definitely, I guess, depending on how many of those diagnoses apply to the child, the need is greater. That's what they call one of the more complex needs, for which the HCP is usually provided. But yeah, I mean, it is all about the needs. But again, as you've said, Michelle, about I said Michelle. Anyway, it's always Mich. But yeah, as you've said, taking that kind of umbrella approach, that neurodiversity approach, it has its own kind of challenges, and in terms of ADHD in particular, because for instance ASD, you don't really medicate for ADHD. The medication can have huge beneficial effect. So,
and this is the challenge we have, and somebody's written in the chat on Facebook, it's a great topic for next week, because it is a good question, because where does it stop and end? And I remember when I was starting my research into ADHD 3 years ago, and I wanted to understand the different neurodiverse conditions, so autism, dyslexia, where's the line, what's this? The more I researched it, the more entangled it became. So it'd be a really interesting topic to explore next week, but it is all about our individual needs. And you're right, Steph, if we don't say this is part of our ADHD, are we going to get the help for it? If somebody's diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, or more often than not, bipolar 2, for example, women emotionally unstable because of emotional dysregulation, we're not going to get the medication that's so effective. So this is why this is really important to say, excuse me, but people with ADHD, we do have sensory challenges. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily got other comorbid conditions that we're not going to get the help for. So it's important to recognise, and what we've suggested to our members this week is that they do an audit of all of the ways that you may be affected. So go through all of your senses. So do you have certain problems with taste? Do certain foods disgust you when you're more tired? Do you have certain problems with sound? I used to call it my stress deafness. before I got diagnosed, because it would be as if I couldn't hear, or it would be 30 seconds later, you know, like when your computer's on a delay and it's the wheels spinning round, and you have heard what somebody said, but your brain hasn't processed it yet. So auditory processing disorder was a big issue for me, and still is when I'm tired. But I went to the doctors, got my hearing checked, but nobody mentioned, could this be an ADHD thing? And coupled with all the signs that I had ADHD, it might have been an indicator for me to get picked up sooner than I was if people knew about this. But you know, through our research this week and all the research you've done, it tends to be siloed off, the sensory stuff, and it shouldn't be. It should not be.
Yeah, no, it very much goes together to some extent. So yeah, the five senses: taste, touch, sound, smell, sight. A lot of us will have sensitivities like to sound, as you've said, noise, smell. So yeah, I know you're very sensitive to smell. You can't, yeah, the bathrooms that are all scented. It's like, I can't be in here. Yeah, and the difficulty is, like ADHD, that's invisible. Sensory challenges are also invisible. So I think I used an example, so that, you know, usually you can't see what someone with sensory challenges is going through, what they're dealing with, what they're tolerating. And they could like be sensitive to the light above them, the noise. And I know this is quite an ASD style thing, but it's like you can see that the cup of tolerance, you know, it's filling up, filling up, filling up, and then all of a sudden you see like they basically melt down, but you can't see what the cause of that was. But literally it could be that suddenly the temperature has just gone a little bit too high for them to handle, and then they just lose it. And that does happen a lot with ADHDers. And because we don't know, a lot of ADHDers don't understand that they are suffering from these sensory challenges. It's like a mystery for everyone. Why have they just lost it? Why have they just gotten to this point where they just can't take anymore? So if you understand, name it to tame it, like we talk about, then you can start maybe doing something about it before you tip over the edge.
Yeah, and often you're right, you don't notice. You know, one of our members was saying that, you know, this guy in an office had a really annoying voice, and people would get, you know, the other people in the office would get annoyed and mention it, but she didn't quite realize how much it was affecting her until she shouted out, "Shut up," really loudly. And that's it. You know, sometimes we're not realizing how much this has impacted on us. And I've kind of been doing a lot of thinking about this week, and it's a bit like our regulation of attention or emotions. We can't seem to regulate what our body pays attention to in terms of sensory input or inputs from our body. So sometimes it'll overfocus, like misophonia, you know, when you can't stand somebody chewing, which is very, very common. But sometimes you won't notice it. But if you tune into it, your brain chooses to hone in on it, then it becomes unbearable.
Oh yes, clicking, ticking clocks. You know, oh.
But then sometimes I need background noise in order to focus, and sometimes I can't bear it. So sometimes I need my white pink noise or a fan on to kind of take up that bandwidth in my head. But other times it's like my brain's overloaded, it's too much already. I need absolute silence. I need the lights dimmed, I need no smells, and I just need to calm my brain down. And it's almost as if you can't choose what your brain focuses on. And sometimes it will focus on all of the sensory stuff if you're overloaded, and sometimes it needs that sensory stuff because it's understimulated and we're not noticing that we're hungry, cold, tired, we need a wee, as is quite common that we discovered this week with members, is that we're not tuning into our bodies and paying attention. We don't have that choice. So this week's been fascinating because I thought, oh, this isn't going to really impact me much. I've got a little bit of sensory stuff, but now I've realized it's much bigger, much more of a challenge that I need to I need to look at. And so have some of our members, haven't they?
Yeah, yeah. It's and that's the thing. It's always about being able to have that lens. It's just really makes all the difference. So the more we learn, you know, how our ADHD affects us, what other things can come into play, the better chance we'll have of managing, you know, these challenges that we kind of battle with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And it's name it to tame it. And we're still discovering, even though we've worked in this field for several years now, Steph, we're still discovering elements of our ADHD, which is why we've chosen next week to focus on what is a part of my ADHD? What counts as, a comorbid condition? Is this thing that I do part of my ADHD? Does this need addressing? What will help with this? Because things like rejection sensitive dysphoria, which we covered, a lot of people and a lot of our members didn't realize that was a key part of ADHD.
Yeah, actually, I think the biggest kind of realizations, it's that the RSD. I found members really have been talking about how revelationary it was to watch the webinar that we did, that you did, I think, Mish, on RSD, and sensory this week as well has been a real eye opener. So yeah, it's been great though, hasn't it, to be able to provide that awareness, because it makes a huge difference for us.
Yeah, and then, you know, you always say name it to tame it. We have to understand what we're dealing with here, and then our lives will become much more simple and much easier to manage. And we have a hard enough challenge as it is as adults with ADHD, even if we are medicated and treated and doing all we can. So let's just make it as easy as possible. But this week's been fascinating, just learning that we can either be understimulated, overstimulated, or even seek more sensory stimulation, which has been great. And we did have a giggle on Monday, didn't we, Steph, when you got your shiatsu massager out. So if anybody wants to look at that clip where Steph and I unfortunately got the giggles, which, you know, possibly is that a sensory issue, not being able to control your giggles.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. I only thought about it from the toilet perspective, they call it interoception, sensations you feel from your internal organs. Yeah, that kind of sensitivity. It's interesting. So I'm just reading the chats, Stephen.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting comments going on here, but do join the ADHD Unlocked community if you haven't already. We've got lots of topics in the portal. You can pick up the videos, listen to them as podcasts, lots of resources if you want to have a read, and a really supportive community, and have access to the Smash It sessions, which we do every Tuesday, the Wednesday meetings. So we alternate the Smash It sessions between 12:30 p.m. lunchtime and 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. The same with the Wednesday meetings, the support and chat meetings, as well as webinars throughout the week, Monday, Wednesday, and extra stuff as well. So do join us. It's members.adhdunlocked.co.uk/shop. And we look forward to seeing you next week for what it actually is, my ADHD anyway. Because, you know, it's not as simple as at first glance. So it'd be really, really good to have a dig into this. So I'm going to go now and top up my tank, Steph, so that I don't get challenged by sounds, smells, you know, if I'm tired. So go top up your tanks, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we look forward to seeing you group, but do chat about any sensory challenges you have within comments on the thread here on this video in the main group. And we will see you next week. So take care, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.